want to kick it off with Kohberger because that case is just so compelling, fascinating, horrifying, and some significant developments have gone down in the past couple of days. Number one, prosecution seeking the death penalty. Is anyone surprised by this? Marcia, as the former prosecutor, I'll start with you on that.
Not really. And all of the, you have to remember, and I guess one of the critics, people who are critical of the death penalty are going to point this out as well. You're in Idaho. Idaho has different mores and different standards in terms of what is death worthy than, say, California does. That said, the horrific murder of 4 young people in this manner that clearly appears to be premeditated, if true, it's now alleged, but if proven, really does show a very serious, the kind of offender where you would expect the death penalty to be on the table for sure. And now they have said in their letter, they can withdraw the intent because at this time they don't have any evidence of mitigation being the defense effort to show why his life should be spared. So it's early days yet, but if when a crime jumps off the page at you like this, that is the kind of crime where if you have a death penalty, you would imagine the case would be death eligible. So I can't say I'm surprised, but I do say, let's wait and see if they hang on to this. I don't know that they will.
Mark, does this raise the challenge for prosecutors going in front of a jury? That some theorize it makes juries more reluctant to convict if they know the death penalty may be on the table.
No, I take the opposite view, and I hearken back to a case I had, which was Scott Peterson. I was complaining in real time that they were seeking the death penalty, not because they wanted the death penalty, but because they wanted to get I should say death penalty eligible jurors. One of the reasons that Scott's death penalty was reversed unanimously by the California Supreme Court was precisely because the judge was kicking off everybody on that jury who didn't want to or was uncomfortable with imposing the death penalty. Most of the studies have shown death penalty jurors are more pro-prosecution. You combine that with the fact that, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but with a circumstantial evidence case like this, you want somebody, if you're a prosecutor, who is going to be more pro-prosecution. This is a perfect way to weed out the people who would be more on the fence.
All right. So speaking of the evidence, now we have learned that we knew before that the prosecution had used something called genetic genealogy to figure out where did this DNA found on the knife sheath that had been left by the murderer at the murder scene, where did it come from? They were told that they had done a regular search in the FBI's database. Does this match a perp who we have in the system? And it did not. So they went to genetic genealogy, where you can use public databases, and in this case, private databases as well, of not private to you and me, but in other words, a special database that they went to try to figure out whether it has, non-governmental.
Right.
To figure out whether this DNA we have matches anybody whose DNA is publicly available, and that's how they zeroed in on Kohberger. It wasn't his, but they said we can definitely link it to the dad who lives in the Poconos, someone related to that dad. And then the circles got more concentric around the son, Bryan, who was 10 miles away from the murder scene. Marcia, we now know that they retested the son himself, Bryan Kohberger. They took a cheek swab, and they are now saying it showed a direct match, Bryan Kohberger's DNA on that knife sheath. So we're going to get into how a lot of the other evidence is circumstantial. That's not circumstantial.
Well, it is. Actually, isn't it funny? People have this notion that circumstantial means something much more removed, but circumstantial evidence is a fingerprint. Circumstantial evidence is DNA. I used to tell the juries all the time, I would say, this is largely a circumstantial evidence case. And then they'd say, well, you're out. Never mind. I'm not interested. I said, well, how about the fact that there's a fingerprint and the victim's on the victim's shoulder? And, well, but that's not circumstantial. Oh, it is. It is. So's DNA. Huh. Same thing. The limitation of circumstantial evidence is, and with DNA, for example, or a fingerprint, is you can't tell when it was deposited. So, for example, you have this amazing result of DNA, 1 in 5 octillion chance of that it is him as opposed to a randomly selected person, unrelated. So that is a match. But you don't know when that DNA got on there. And you don't know how that knife sheath got on there. So it leaves room for the defense to say someone else dropped the knife sheath. Of course, it was mine at one time. I had my fingerprints on it. I had my DNA on it from months ago. So in that sense, it is circumstantial, but it is very damning. I mean, what is your knife sheath doing under the body of one of the victims when you have no known natural or unculpable reason for being there? They didn't know each other. They didn't party together. So just the fact the knife sheath was there, and then of course the DNA on it, you put it all together, but it's all circumstantial.
Well, let me ask you a question on that, because that's interesting. If his bloody fingerprint were found at the scene, or if DNA from the victims were found in his car, would that also be circumstantial?
Yes, same thing. You can't say when it got put there. No one saw it get put there. Direct evidence is me seeing. If you go and shoot somebody and I watch you do it, that is direct evidence. But of course, I would argue that whoever you shot deserved it. So that's a whole other issue. But
right.
If I don't see it, if you're coming up with evidence that is deposited at some point in time that is not observed by anyone, even a bloody fingerprint, though of course a bloody fingerprint gets a lot closer to something you could call like direct evidence, it's still circumstantial.
That's interesting. Well, I didn't know that. I never practiced criminal law, so that's interesting to me.
Mark, to follow up on that, it's interesting because with the Innocence Project, most of the evidence against people who were condemned and sent to death row was as a result of direct evidence, and they were exculpated by the circumstantial evidence of DNA, which is that's one of the things I talk to jurors about in voir dire, to point out the differences of what we always think. It turns out that many of the studies show that direct evidence, eyewitness identification, is much more fallible than circumstantial evidence.
Well, the genetic genealogy link that started it off before they got the actual cheek swab from the defendant, and they were looking more at who in the universe could this DNA on this knife sheath belong to, is becoming an issue in the case, Mark. The defense lawyer is asking the court to compel prosecutors to turn over additional discovery materials and info on the genetic genealogy techniques investigators used before labeling Kohberger their suspect. They're also asking for information on why the FBI expanded the range of model years on a white Hyundai Elantra they were looking for in connection with the case. Now, those two items that they want discovery on might have nothing to do with each other, but they might have something to do with one another in that initially the police said they were looking for a Hyundai Elantra of certain years that would not have included Bryan Kohberger's. And then they expanded the years to a year, his was 2015, that would have been included. And there's been some questions raised about whether that expansion happened after they got the hit on Kohberger's dad and started to zero. So what's the defense attorney doing here? What's he trying to set up?
This is a brilliant strategy by the defense, and I'll tell you why. You've hit exactly on what they think. They're creating a timeline to show that the expansion of the Elantra after the FBI had given an opinion that it would have excluded Kohberger, and then we talked about this. They then went back to them once they had Kohberger, and they expanded the number of years to include his car. But this is also a very subtle kind of a gray mail, because that is a technique in classified documents cases where you say, okay, we're going to go forward. I'm not going to get a classification. You've got to show me the classified documents publicly, and then the prosecutor backs down. We know that the FBI and investigative agencies do not want to reveal how they use or how they get to this genetic testing that then takes them to one of the relatives. So they're saying on one hand, show us that, hoping that they say we're not going to do that. If they turn out and they say, okay, we're going to turn that process, that investigative technique over, but it's under a protective order, that's fine. Because then what you're going to do as the defense, you're going to take the two unidentified males that are that were found at the scene, the DNA, and you're going to use the same testing protocol and see who you come up with in the databases based on their very own protocol. And God forbid that you hit somebody who is a potential other suspect, because then you're going to ask, all kinds of questions about why their DNA was there or that universe of alternative suspects, third-party liability.
Junk science. That's what the doctor called many of those fruit and vegetable supplements on the market. Junk science because they use extracts of common produce department fruits and vegetables with few health benefits. But I want to tell you about Field of Greens. Field of Greens is different. They use whole organic fruits and vegetables, not a watered down supplement. And it's backed by a better health promise, which I'm going to tell you about. Each ingredient in Field of Greens was scientifically chosen to support vital organs like heart, lungs, kidney health. Others support your immune system, blood pressure, metabolism, and healthy weight loss. Their better health promise is simple. The next time you're at a doctor for a checkup, if the doctor does not say you're looking healthier than before, you will get your money back. How about that? That's a deal right there. So let me get you started with 15% off. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use my promo code MK. That's promo code MK at fieldofgreens.com. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.